We think we know our neighbors, until one night they show us who they really are. A friendly wave across the lawn, a borrowed cup of sugar. These are the small rituals that build a sense of community, a fragile illusion of safety. But behind the closed doors and drawn curtains of the house next door, secrets can fester. The person you share a fence with might not be who they seem. What happens when the familiar face you see every day becomes a source of unimaginable dread? These are the moments when the quiet suburban street transforms into a personal nightmare, a stage for horrors you never thought possible. Tonight, we delve into 5 chilling encounters, reminders that sometimes the greatest monsters are the ones living just a few feet away. Our first story comes from a young woman named Clara, who had just moved into her first apartment. It was a cozy top-floor unit in a converted Victorian house. Her only neighbor on the floor was an elderly man named Mr. Abernathy. He seemed pleasant enough, always offering a quiet nod in the hallway. But his odd habits soon became unsettling. Every night, like clockwork, Clara would hear a faint, rhythmic tapping coming from his apartment. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't loud, just persistent enough to be noticeable. One evening, the tapping was accompanied by a low humming, a sound that made the hairs on her arms stand up. Curiosity got the better of her. Peeking through her peephole, she saw Mr. Abernathy standing in the dim hallway facing her door. He wasn't moving, just standing there, his head slightly tilted. She held her breath, her heart pounding against her ribs. Then she saw it. He slowly raised a single bony finger and began to tap on her door, the same rhythmic sound from before, only louder now. Tap, tap, tap. She backed away, her phone shaking in her hand as she dialed for help. She never found out what he wanted. She moved out the following week, never looking back. This next account is from a father of 2 named Mark. His family had lived in the same cul-de-sac for years and knew everyone. Their next-door neighbor, a quiet bachelor named Gerald, mostly kept to himself. The kids would sometimes lose a ball in his yard, and he'd always return it with a stiff smile. One summer, Mark was installing a security camera on the side of his house, overlooking his backyard. While reviewing the footage that night, he noticed something strange. The motion sensor had been triggered around 2 a.m. The footage showed Gerald standing motionless by their shared fence, his silhouette barely visible in the moonlight. He was just watching their house. Mark brushed it off as a one-time thing, maybe a sleepless night. But it happened again, and again. Every night between 2 and 3 a.m., Gerald would be there, a silent sentinel in the dark. The real terror began when Mark zoomed in on one night's recording. Gerald was holding something. It was a small doll, one that looked exactly like Mark's youngest daughter. He was gently stroking its hair, his gaze fixed on her bedroom window. Mark didn't call the police. He didn't want to cause a scene. Instead, he built a taller fence. A much taller fence. Story 3 takes place in a remote, wooded area. A couple, Sarah and Ben, had bought a small cabin as a weekend getaway. Their nearest neighbor was a mile down a winding dirt road, a recluse named Silas who lived in a dilapidated shack. They only saw him once, a gaunt figure who stared at their car as they drove past. One night, a fierce storm knocked out the power. Huddled by the fireplace, they heard a loud crash from their porch. Ben grabbed a flashlight and cautiously opened the door. On their welcome mat lay a crudely made wooden bird, its wings twisted at an unnatural angle. They were unnerved, but assumed the wind had blown it there. The next morning, they found another one hanging from the branch of a tree outside their bedroom window. Over the next few days, more appeared. One was nailed to their front door. Another was placed on the hood of their car, its wooden eyes painted to look like they were crying. They were being watched, tormented by an unseen presence. They packed their bags in a panic, but as they were about to leave, Sarah noticed something carved into the dusty window of their car. It was a single word. Stay. They never went back to the cabin again. Our fourth encounter comes from a college student named Leo, who was renting a room in a large suburban house. The homeowner, a middle-aged woman named Brenda, was always a little too friendly, a little too interested in his life. She would ask him what time he'd be home, what he was studying, who his friends were. He thought she was just being motherly. Then he started noticing things were out of place in his room. A book moved from his desk to his nightstand. The clothes in his closet were rearranged. He felt a constant sense of unease, as if his private space was being invaded. He decided to set up a hidden camera. What he saw made his blood run cold. The footage showed Brenda entering his room late at night while he was asleep. She wouldn't take anything. She would just walk around, touching his belongings, sometimes sitting on the edge of his bed, watching him sleep for minutes on end. In one clip, she leaned down close to his face, so close he could have felt her breath, and whispered something he couldn't make out. He moved out the next day without saying a word, leaving the key on the kitchen counter. He still wonders what she whispered to him in the dark. This final story comes from a family who moved into what they thought was their dream home. It had a big backyard for their dog, Buster. Their neighbor to the right, Mr. Henderson, was a retired butcher. He seemed friendly, always offering them cuts of meat from his old shop. But Buster hated him. The dog would bark and growl ferociously whenever Mr. Henderson was near the fence. One afternoon, Buster went missing from the backyard. They searched everywhere, called his name until their voices were hoarse, but he was gone. Days turned into a week, and they began to lose hope. One evening, Mr. Henderson came over, a sympathetic look on his face. He was holding a large, neatly wrapped package. "A little something to cheer you up," he said with a sad smile. "My finest cut." He placed the heavy package on their kitchen counter and left. As the mother began to unwrap the brown butcher paper, she noticed a small dark stain seeping through. A sickeningly familiar smell filled the air. And tied around the thick twine was a small tarnished metal tag. Engraved on it was one word: Buster. You never really know who's living next door. Behind the smiles and pleasantries, behind the perfectly manicured lawns and cheerful holiday decorations, a different reality can exist. The world is full of people, and you can never be certain what secrets they keep locked away. So tonight, when you hear an unfamiliar sound or see a shadow move where it shouldn't, remember these stories. Keep your doors locked and your curtains closed. Thank you for watching. If these stories chilled you to the bone, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications.